One of the things that started to come out of it for us, which wasn't a main aim originally, but it was around the issues of accountability and around issues of NGO accountability. So it started getting us looking at the various aspects of what do we actually mean by that. The concept itself has come up several times over the last few days, but often it seems to cluster a variety of different types of accountabilities into the same statement. So here we just hope to tease some of that apart, and then I'll go on to give you some examples from using the Global Fund, but when we talk about this at a global level, and then Annie is going to speak of that in relation to some of her findings from South Africa. First thing usually in these situations is to define what you mean by accountability. I'm not going to read these out, but what you can see here is that there are as many definitions of accountability as there are people saying it. There are a variety of ways that people refer to this issue, whether it's related to the responsible use of power, right down to issues of leadership, governance, and transparency. These are all quotes that are taken from the Euronews website, What's in a Word, and I think it gives a good example of the variety of ways in which people understand this issue. To take a step back, we need to look at NGO accountability in its historical context. While these are obviously crude divisions, we can say that there has been a divide between two particular phases. From the 1980s until around 1995, it really focused on capacity building issues. This was driven as a byproduct of performance management, and also as the rise of civil society throughout the 1990s, which was accompanied by increased calls for accountability. And I'll go into that in a moment as well as to where some of those calls came from. This period really focused on financial accountability, issues of organizational capacity, issues of efficiency and performance delivery. In the governance phase then, it moves into the rising discourse of good governance, and that also started to be applied to NGOs as well. This is looking at issues of legitimacy, self-regulation, and the rise of independent accreditation mechanisms in different countries. Southeast Asia is one example where several accreditation mechanisms were put in place. What we're seeing, the trend we're seeing at this time, is NGOs are being consulted an awful lot more and are gaining observational status in different global institutions. From 2002 onwards, or around that period, there is a degree of a state resurgence, and that's coupled with the rights-based discourse. So it looks at issues of screening the credibility of the NGOs and the promotion of external, which are often state-controlled and regulatory frameworks. For example, countries of origin where NGOs come from, when they want to register as an NGO, and the various different things that they have to do in order to be able to do that. This, as I said, was coupled then with the rights-based discourse, which looked at balancing multiple responsibilities to different constituencies, stakeholders, whatever the term is that we use. And again, a different trend that we start to see here is the consultancy and observation status continues, but it's also added onto that is an increased governance role. And that's particularly the case in new global health initiatives like the Global Fund and the Gavi Alliance. NGO accountability in question. We need to start with, well, what exactly are NGOs? And as all of you know, there's a multiple variety within that. People who are working as faith-based organizations. NGOs are sometimes also community-based organizations. They are sometimes different. This leads us to issues of then, what are we talking about when we put all of these under the umbrella of civil society? Some people will claim that civil society is about social movements, but NGOs are also coupled in there. We're not going to try and resolve that dilemma for you now, but just wanted to put it up there that it is an issue that we're very conscious of. The questions of NGO accountability then came about as there was this rise of civil society involvement in advocacy, in service delivery, and increasingly in governance. Some of this came from very strong right-wing politics. In the United States, during the time of the Iraq War, there was a lot of questions within the Bush administration around the role of civil society because they were attempting to tackle politically the government. In many other countries, and there are a variety of countries on the African continent, the same thing applies, where restrictions are put on NGOs and civil society because they are seen as being too political and challenging the status quo of the governments that are there. But related to this then are other questions of NGOs particularly are quite often largely undemocratic. And are they legitimate advocates for demanding greater democratic practices in global and country governance? So these are some of the issues that were coming up when you actually look at the history of NGOs and broader civil society as well. So what I'm trying to do here is to tease this out a little bit. When we talk about accountability, we talk about it really in three different types. Effectiveness. It looks at issues of quality control and quantity of services that are delivered. Some people term this upward accountability to donors, and it's often driven by donor models of financial accountability, log frames, things like that that you will be familiar with. This issue of organisational reliability is another factor here, which is looking at management structures, the human resources policies of the NGOs, and sometimes this is termed horizontal accountability. Accountability to the sector, which is driven both by donor demands and also NGO sector-wide associations, which are looking to increase the capacity of their members. And the issue of legitimacy then brings it to another level. Issues of transparency. Where are the ties to the public? What is the representative status? And the relationship to the community that is served, but also, increasingly, the value to society as a whole. This is often termed downward accountability, or some people call it forward accountability, but it's accountability to those who are affected by both the actions and the inactions and decisions of NGOs, and it is often driven by advocacy partners, political opponents, and affected communities. Some of the mechanisms are often categorized as there are accountability tools or accountability processes. Some of the tools that are included here are annual reports, financial accounts, performance assessments, audits, the logical frameworks that I mentioned. And some of the processes that are driven by NGOs themselves include incentivized accountability accreditation. The idea that once you get accreditation, you can start to apply for grants and you can actually deliver certain services. Also by institutionalizing complaints procedures for external and internal stakeholders, conflict of interest policies, and social and community audits. And we would be very interested if any of you have examples of that, where it has worked, or where some of the challenges that you have faced in trying to implement them. This third one that I put in here really connects to the later part of what I'm going to talk about. We're seeing, as these new global initiatives are in place, and that NGOs and civil society are getting more involved in them, we're talking about multi-level governance systems. Global and country and community. It's connecting across those three levels. And what these often do are combine different systems of accountability, using financial and reputational accountability as well. It leads us then to a lot of challenges when we're trying to apply an accountability framework to NGOs. We're talking about it in the context of interconnected actors and stakeholders. There are multiple accountability requirements, and there are also differences between NGOs or the people who are the organisations categorised under the umbrella of civil society, which itself is a very ambiguous term. There are tensions between the accountability requirements between what donors want and what NGOs want, between log frame holds and NGOs who may have implemented feedback systems from their community, but what those service users might actually say may not work within a log frame, which can tend to be quite rigid. And ultimately, there's a lack of joint or coordinated accountability mechanisms that go beyond the voluntary codes that Thomas, you spoke about as well, the NGO Code of Conduct for Health System Strengthening. These often have good intentions, but they don't have the teeth to be able to hold people account and to have sanctioning mechanisms.